All right, y'all. Um, I'm gonna be talking about the Young Lords today. Uh, really quick beforehand, this project has been a perfection is the enemy of progress project for me. So this is gonna be my last take. I'm sorry if I have to stop and think about things. I'm not perfectly organized right now. This is we're about to start hour 11 of me trying to write this into a paper. And this is I think take 8 of the video. So this is it. I'm gonna post my sources, my bibliography, as a text underneath this. Um, but I just wanted to kind of get ahead of that. There will be times where I've got to like stop and think and organize my thoughts. I'm sorry in advance. That being said, today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Young Lords. Um, and more specifically about the issues and response to the presence of the patriarchy within the Young Lords. Um, and so kind of to begin, I wanted to give a brief history of the Young Lords. In the late 60s in Chicago, there there was this program called the Urban Renewal Program. And functionally it was a name under which the mayor and a bunch of real estate agents and a bunch of bankers would illegally collaborate to incentivize white people to live in neighborhoods where people of color were so that they could hike the property tax up and get a shit ton of money out of it. Uh, Regardless of the intentions, the outcome was obvious. It was the gentrification of these black and brown neighborhoods. And at this point in time, there was a particularly high number or concentration of Puerto Ricans in Chicago, Chicago and New York, the two main cities where the Young Lords came to exist. Um, or not came to exist, but were of prominence. The Young Lords were formed as a response to this gentrification program, uh, and you know, became sort of a uh, Puerto Rican Hispanic response to the Black Panthers. But they also had some black membership too. Like, well, we'll get to that. They had a 13-point program. Uh, I'm gonna read out the points. We want self-determination for Puerto Ricans, liberation of the island and liberation of the island and inside the United States. We want self-determination for all Latinos. We want liberation for all third world people. We are revolutionary nationalists and oppose racism. We want community control of our institutions and land. We want true education of our Creole culture and Spanish culture. We oppose capitalists and alliances with traders. We oppose the American military. That's three Ks. We want freedom for all political prisoners. We want equality for women. Machismo must be revolutionary, not oppressive. We believe self-arm we believe armed self-defense and armed struggle are the only means to liberation. We fight anti-communism with intentional unity, and we want a socialist society. So those were the 13 points. And this was kind of the governing or the foundational text of the Young Lords. The that was their manifesto. Um, and before we or not before, but as we get into this, I just want to kind of describe sort of a ubiquitous issue during this time. There were a lot, so you hear my cat meowing. I'm making him wait outside so I can focus on this. He hates that. Uh Outside my room, not outside the building. So Bell Hooks writes. When uh, specifically writing about the beginnings of like contemporary feminist movements. She writes, many of these men were radical thinkers who participated in movements for social justice, speaking out on behalf of the workers, the poor, and speaking out on racial justice. But when it came to the issues of gender, they were as sexist as their conservative cohorts. Um, and she's speaking about like you know, the the women who started the contemporary feminist movement, the men they were with. So these radical, liberation focused men that were uh unwilling to acknowledge, for example, their machismo. In the case of the Young Lords, and we'll get specifically to that. But beforehand, I also want to talk about this article in the Anarchist Library, and it talks about sort of it's a text basically encompassing how to make a movement, a group like or with the same intentions of or like with similarity to the Young Lords and things to look out for. And one thing that it says, watch out for are what it calls default approaches to organizing groups. And it gives a few leadership, for example, leadership by people who have seniority or self-select, vague decision-making processes, like this kind of uh unitary power, or like discarding the views or the opinions of some of the party, because inevitably the people whose views are being discarded, uh if you discard people's views, period, you're going to start to minoritize people within the party, and that's not going to help. And when you're fighting against a system that is uh, foundationally one that minoritizes groups, one of the default practices they warn against is hierarchy. And so they identify dangers of this approach being the abuse of power, burnout of a few people, and no ways to plug for others to plug in, unprincipled behavior by people at the top. People at the top can be bought off by attention, career opportunities, or money. And they give some alternatives. Horizontal decision-making structure based on consensus that prevents decision-making from being concentrated in one person or small group, and that can help tasks and roles be distributed to many people. We'll get back to the decision, or sorry, to the alternatives, but I just wanted to identify that that hierarchy is a toxic trait, period. If you're in a group that is promotes or relies on hierarchy, that is something to improve from. That is a negative of the group. Um, and this was identified within the group. Um, sorry, I've got all my notes pulled up and am getting confused. Oh, so okay, yes, sorry. So to begin, kind of, the Young Lords was a group with hierarchy, and that hierarchy was particularly uh in favor of men. All male central committee. It was structured to had several committees and unions within it. Um, a lot of interdependence, which is good, but this central committee was all men, and it's 13-point platform. When I read it to you, I don't know if you picked up on it. Point 10 was we want equality for women. Machismo must be revolutionary, not oppressive, which is, if you know what machismo is, that is like saying you know, racism must be revolutionary, not oppressive. It doesn't make sense. That is a that is a no-go. That does not exist. Um, and this was identified by women, specifically Iris Morales, who will is in my list of citations, I think two or three times. Like she was a member of the Young Lords and a very influential one, and one that pushed for this, uh, well, pushed for what became a new point, which is we want equality for women, down with machismo and male chauvinism, which is let me pull up a chauvinism is like the belief in the superiority or dominance of a group of people. And so down with male dominance, which eventually replaced the line of machismo in the 13 points after enough fighting and the creation of a women's union, uh, a women's union and uh, a women's caucus within the organization of the Young Lords. Uh, in addition, like basically the women organized within for this for this power within the organization, and the organization was resistant to it. Both higher ups and just the general culture within it was very patriarchal and very diminishing and demeaning towards the women. But they organized and they demonstrated and they threw their power around within the organization. Mind you, they made up 40% of the membership. They had the power to throw around. Um, and so pretty quickly, you know, uh, some changes started taking place within the organization. Change started, the ball got started rolling. Uh, Denise Oliver Velez, I'm just gonna uh butcher her name. Sorry, one take. And Gloria Fontanez, also butchering her name. Sorry. Uh, were both promoted to roles in the Central Committee. Like there, were changes happening, and specifically, Denise, uh, kind of in this new top-down role or with this like bigger picture view became even more aware of the ways that gendered assumptions on who can do what and who can't do what were affecting the roles that women were given, and which ministries or which organizational aspects they were included in. And so in even when they were in parts of the organization that were more male dominated or like masculine oriented, like the defense ministry, they were still being put in more feminine or feminized positions. Like the Ministry of Defense, they were being put in they were being asked to do like childcare and secretarial work almost exclusively. And so like these issues were bone deep in the organization. And specifically with Denise's acknowledgement of that, it made me think of the kind of we love to categorize people, um, for better or worse. And this often for worse, let's be honest. And this makes me think of the social change roles. And when I pull up the kind of the full map of all 10 roles, women were being relegated to like three or four of these roles within the organization. The ones I identified were caregivers, healers, and storytellers. And when they were doing the work, like they were clearly doing the work of visionaries, of disruptors. They were frontline responders, which we'll get to a little bit more later. But like when they were doing work, they were relegated to roles, storyteller, healer, caregiver, that are not given enough credit generally. And then when they were doing the work of other roles, other people would take credit for their work. And so it was, you know, it's not surprising, but it's surprising that it's happening in a such a socially aware group to me. Um, or at least it's surprising that it's happening to that extent. And I was a little bit, I'm aware of, kind of similar issues going on in the Black Panther Party. Kwame, Kwame, Kwame Ture. formerly Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, spoke about and wrote about kind of these similar kinds of issues going on in the Black Panther Party, and I was not, I should have expected them to also be present here. But you know, the Women's Caucus and the Women's Union also, like, when they started to demonstrate more power, opened doors to cooperations with LGBT organizations and welcoming LGBT members in. So, like, they were working with Star and like the Gay Liberation Front, and basically just like being a more effective organization. And uh in- one source that I'm gonna actually shout out specifically because it's really cool and really hard to find was it's just called the Young Lords the readings. Re Not me messing up my own source. Come on now. The Young Lords, a reader. There we go. And it's kind of this it's a book, which is just a collection of like articles and writings written by members of the Young Lords. And these articles are mixed into 12 chapters, kind of covering different aspects of the organization. Really cool, really hard to find. I could only find it on the Wayback Machine, so I don't know if this is like still exists easily to find. But it has a chapter specifically on women in the revolution, and the women in the lords who confronted the leaders with the demand to start promoting women's equal agency in and outside of the agency or of the organization. And so this is, it's got a bunch of really important writings. But a few years after the women's union within the party was formed, the Central Committee uh, declared that too much time had been given to the issues of sexism, and kind of pulled back on this. Iris Morales, I mentioned her earlier, uh, kind of attributes this to the party shifting focus from recruitment within like inner city recruitment in the US to recruitment within Puerto Rico itself. Uh, who like, the organization saw as like more traditional than the US in terms of gender roles, and decided that that was a reason to not challenge them, which I don't, we don't have to say every time that they do some shit that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's short-sighted, and it ultimately led to uh issues within the party. Um when they said that too much time had been given to issues of sexism, this also spoke about issues of racism. And it was their shift to prioritizing national and class oppressions. And so like a bunch of the African American members of the party left because it was like, okay, well, you know, for obvious reasons, including Denise Oliver Perez, who I mentioned earlier. She was a black woman, uh, and a member of the Central Committee, and so she resigned from the committee and left the Young Lords, joining the Black Panthers instead. And so just like this this top-down decision to just pull back from the issues that were important to so much of the organization. Um, and to me, like looping back around to that anarchist library, uh, dangers of the default approach. Uh, this is a spot where they suggest an alternative to hierarchy, and this is a spot where that top-down leadership, that hierarchical model is it is destructive, is a failing, is a failure. A horizontal decision-making structure, which is what they recommend as an alternative, would have stopped this, would have let everybody who had something to say it. Unfortunately, the Young Lords was based on sort of a military structure. They were militant, and that's understandable where their initial inspiration would come from, but they had a lot of time to change that. But this hierarchical model, this military structure, just fundamentally toppled what they were going for. Um, and I just want to like quickly say this is not to take away from the Young Lords what they stood for and what they did. I think it's really sad because my original project was going to be on the Young Lords. I spent most of my time reading up on them and what they did and these actions that they took, and I realized like I don't think I've it's all he, him, the group, you know, this guy, that guy. I don't I didn't there's like hardly mention of women in this history that are not uh victims or martyrs. And so, it's really unfortunate. But that being said, like despite the major setbacks, the women in the Young Lords still got shit done. Uh, they raised major critiques for pharmaceutical companies testing specifically like contraceptives on Puerto Rican women before they were approved by the FDA, on mass sterilization, which specifically in New York, Puerto Rican women were sterilized at much higher rates than white or black women within the city. And they pursued successful campaigns to end this practice in New York. One of the women whose name I saw mentioned, which kind of sparked this like this being the focus, was Carmen Rodriguez, who was a Puerto Rican mother who died during an abortion procedure at Lincoln Hospital. Lincoln Hospital was the site of one of the more famous demonstrations of the Young Lords, a hospital takeover. And after this uh, abortion procedure went wrong, specifically due to medical malpractice and negligence of the doctors and the staff, the Young Lords cooperated and worked with medical care providers within the hospital, doctors and hospital workers and nurses and everything, and they went on strike and they barricaded the hospital and then provided free medical care outside of it. Um, but as a demonstration to push for reforms within the hospital, which were successful. Women also led like, reforms and regulations relating to like lead paint poisoning. And they convinced the state to ban the usage of lead paints in apartments in the city. It was it, despite the diminishment of their power in the organization, the women of the Young Lords were still able to achieve the goals that they set out. And so I think, uh, you know, to me, this is another. I think that the Young Lords were too comfortable in their revolution. They were too comfortable in the scope of it. They were too comfortable in their privilege and machismo. They were, you know, as always, let's let's uh let's throw it back to let's throw it back to bell hooks. Um, Let me find this quote because on God, she nailed it. Hold on, let me pause this recording while I find this quote. Okay, y'all, I'm in shambles. I can't find the quote. Um, but ultimately the idea was like the uh, critique. You have to critique all of a system if you're going to change it. And in a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, you cannot just critique white supremacism. You cannot just critique capitalism. You cannot just critique patriarchy. You need to critique it all. You need to critique the way that it shows up in all of us, and the ways that it shows up, outside of us. You need to critique those, and you need to work on a. I'm so distracted by my cat meowing. Please, my friend, please. Long story short, long story long. Uh, we all have room to grow, and that room to grow is squandered when we not only refuse, or sorry, not only don't question it, but in the case of the young lords, refuse to acknowledge it when it's brought up to us. Uh, I think it's especially important to remember that as social workers, as future social workers, as advocates and representatives of those targeted by and failed by this system. Um, yeah, that's it. Thank you for coming to my disorganized TED Talk. Sources below.